Good evening and welcome to tonight's virtual Board of Education meeting for the Westerville City Schools. The Ohio Legislature approved emergency legislation allowing school boards to conduct meetings by teleconference or video conference, providing the meeting also can be observed by the public. In order to comply with this requirement, tonight's meeting is being streamed live and recorded on the board's YouTube channel. While operating under this virtual meeting environment in the spirit of maintaining public participation, the board will accept written comments for specific agenda items as well as comments of a general nature. The board president will share more about this in his opening remarks, and the links to participate in this process are available on the board's virtual meeting webpage at www.wcsoh.org/virtual-BOE. While public participation will not be interactive during tonight's meeting, follow-up with individuals submitting public comment will occur at a later time. Having received confirmation that the video stream is functioning properly, Board of Education President Rick Filardo will now call the official meeting to order.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this evening. Though providing an opportunity for public comment during school board meetings is not a requirement, the Westerville City School District, WCSD, Board of Education believes it is an important part of its engagement with and accountability to the community. In response to public gathering restrictions now in place due to the coronavirus, and in a spirit of maintaining an opportunity for our public to participate in these virtual school board meetings, we are offering interested persons an opportunity to submit written public comment. During a typical WCSD Board of Education meeting, there are two opportunities for individuals to address the board. While functioning under this virtual meeting environment, the opportunity to submit public comment will open when the meeting begins at approximately 6 p.m. and close shortly after each public comment section is reached on the agenda. When submitting your comments through the provided forms, we ask that you please keep your comments professional, avoid the use of inappropriate language, and refrain from identifying individuals by name in the event of a complaint. You may use the following links to submit written comments for the board's consideration, submit comment regarding a specific agenda item, and/or submit comment of a general nature. All comments become a matter of public record and are subject to release under Ohio law and the Federal Freedom of Information Act. As with in-person public comments made during a traditional school board meeting, members reserve the right to respond immediately or withhold comment in order to conduct appropriate research and follow up with the speaker at a later time. Thank you in advance for your understanding and cooperation. And with that, Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Altman.
Here.
Mrs. Davidson.
Here.
Dr. Nesterbaker.
Here.
Mr. Bell.
Here.
Mr. Filardo.
Here. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are able to stand, would you please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 4, may I have a motion and a second to temporarily suspend board policy PO 0169.1, public participation at Board of Education meetings. A motion and a second, please.
So moved. Second.
Thank you very much. Any question, discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Mrs. Davidson.
Yes.
Mrs. Altman.
Yes.
Dr. Nesterbaker.
Yes.
Mr. Bell.
Yes.
Mr. Filardo.
Yes, thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 5.01. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes of the virtual Board of Education meeting held Monday, April 20, 2020? A motion and a second, please.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any question, discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Dr. Nestor Baker,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, thank you. Moving on, district highlights and recognitions, agenda item 6, we have none. Agenda item 7.01, we are going to receive an update from the superintendent and treasurer. Who is going first for us?
President Velardo, I think that's me, Dr. Kellogg. I'll get us kicked off. So thank you for this opportunity. We appreciate the board's interest in having us on a regular basis provide some update, particularly as it relates to what's going on in the district at this time. So Ms. Marshall and I prepared some slides that kind of encapsulate some of the things going on and perhaps give some glimpse of what we might see in the future as best we can. So with that, I'm going to dive into this. Before I do, I don't want to miss the opportunity because all the work we're going to see in here has been put together by people in our district, our staff. This is Teacher Appreciation Week. And so we do want to thank them for all of their hard work and all of our employees' hard work these last couple of weeks, which is arguably, without argument, the most challenging time period in public education history it's ever been. Probably more than just in the United States. So many thanks to everybody in the district for all the work that they're doing each and every day to keep us operational. So with that, I'm going to run through some of the stuff that's been going on and try and give some glimpse into what the future might look like. So next slide, please, Jill. Let's start with our academic affairs department. They have been very, very busy last couple of weeks trying to change our operations from one in which everybody comes to our buildings and classrooms to one in which everybody's at home and we're providing instruction through remote learning. And they have done some fabulous work in terms of framing expectations for distance learning, putting together grading guidelines for the fourth marking period. One of the things that was very important to us was not allowing this time period to be detrimental to students' grades, students' performance throughout the year. So the system they put in place using U for unsatisfactory and S for satisfactory for fourth marking period made a lot of sense. They also put in the caveat for a student, if they wanted to earn a letter grade for that marking period, to do that. So that feeds into GPAs at high school, middle school, which are very important, and of course transcripts. So I think they built a system that is consistent with other school districts and is beneficial to our kids. We looked at our extracurricular athletic programs, which are so important to our students and such an important fabric of the school district. And with the board's assistance, put out some expectations for those activities, with the main component being let's keep our students engaged in as many different ways as possible. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in social media through our coaches and our club advisors in terms of what kids are doing. It's been really fabulous to see that part and seeing those students stay connected to their school that way. Of course, celebrating our students. There is, of course, graduation. And we've put together a graduation plan for the weekend that we normally have it on May 23rd, complete with a virtual graduation, an actual live diploma pickup with an opportunity to cross the stage, and an opportunity for the community at whole to celebrate our seniors through our Light the Path program that we're putting together. More information coming out. Of course, we've been celebrating our seniors. I know we've put together some of our other recognitions and a lot of the awards. As they pick up their caps and gowns this week, they'll pick up a lot of those materials that they normally would throughout the school year through all of our events. We didn't want to forget our 5th and 8th graders who are transitioning out of elementary school and out of middle school. So celebrating them, we have had actually worked with a vendor to create yard signs for those youngsters that they'll be receiving here pretty soon as part of their celebration as they transition. And we had our fabulous staff over at the shop, Ms. Trimble, build out signs to celebrate our graduates that will go in our high school properties, and for our 5th and 8th graders for elementary and middle schools, noting their transition to the next level. So we didn't want to miss that opportunity. It's not the same as when we're in school, but we did want to do as much as we could to celebrate them. And of course, we got an eye towards next year. This is the time of year where at the secondary level in particular, we start building out student course registration for next year. And secondary staff has worked very hard in that part for next year, making sure students are getting to sign up for coursework for next year and be ready for the next school year. And we'll do their transition in elementary school as we roll kids up to the next grade level and teacher assignments. So that's been a big part of the academic affairs. There's a lot underneath all that, but that's been the major part of the work, is making sure we're providing instruction, making sure we're having an assessment system in place that makes sense, making sure that our other activities are still keeping kids engaged and celebrating our students and thinking forward to next year. So a lot of work going on there. Next slide, please. Of course, you can't have distance learning in a modern society without technology, and we've done a lot of work there. The academic affairs team worked with our information technology team to make sure that we're providing Chromebook technology to all of our homes for students that need them, and hotspots. As you know, we've distributed over 3,009 Chromebooks, and I think we had another request today. So it's 3,010 that I'm aware of Chromebooks, and I know over 100 hotspots have been provided to homes at no cost for internet service, so that students have access to their schoolwork, and we have access to our families. We continue to have an inventory and have a system in place for people who still have needs in there, or if they're having computer problems. So that information is on our website as well to continue supporting that part. Next slide. Third big part of what we did was transitioning our food service. As you know, we were originally doing breakfast and lunch delivery on a daily basis on a schedule to those in neighborhoods where we know we have a high concentration of students on free and reduced lunch. We recently moved that to a 1-day-a-week multi-pack delivery to reduce how much interaction we have to have between people to complete that service. That doesn't seem to have stemmed the tide at all. In fact, this Monday, on that multi-pack, we delivered over 26,000 meals to over 2,600 families, students on one day. So we continue to meet that demand. For total through Monday meals served for the year, over 126,000. So that's taken a lot of people working under interesting circumstances with social distancing and all the other things we need to do, involve their transportation services, our operations services, and lots of volunteers. So been very pleased with that. And we'll continue that service as we roll through the year. Next slide, please. Of course, student well-being is a big part of the work we do on a regular basis, and we don't want to lose that opportunity as we move to this remote learning. So one of our big emphasis early on was to make sure our teachers in schools are connected to our families and students. And so we have worked very, very hard to document who we're making contact with and who we've not had contact with at all. There are circumstances, for example, where because of work circumstances at home, age of children, et cetera, we may have children who have transitioned out of the home that we're used to connecting them with to someone else's home, a grandparent, aunt, or uncle, because of parents' working conditions and need for child supervision. And so that's made it a little bit more difficult to connect with some of our families in these circumstances. So overall, we've done a very good job of making those connections, very small numbers at a per school level where we have not made any contact at all. So pleased with that. Early on, our mental health team put out resources to staff and families, just general support about how to deal with mental health at this time. And they've continued to push that message. And then we have specific students that during the regular year, we make regular contact with and deliver services around mental health. And the numbers to date, about 400 students that we've made 2,100 contacts with over the last several weeks to make sure they're doing okay. underneath that, that group has also been very dedicated to helping with delivery of meals on weekends to some of our families. We've coupled with local agencies like Warm to continue that service and expand that, help them out. And making sure, believe it or not, we stay connected with our homeless students. Not everybody understands that there is a fairly significant population of homeless students that are assigned to our school district that we need to make contact with. Everything from food services to making sure they have technology. We've delivered Chromebooks and hotspots and meals to those families to make sure that those kids are connected to school as well. So they've been very, very busy during these weeks behind the scenes, making sure things happen. Next slide, please. And then our operations side, everything from food service, transportation, maintenance, custodial services, human resources. I know Nicole's going to talk about the treasurer's office here in a little bit. All that is still running in the background, so support for graduation, all the logistics that have to go with that process, everything I talked about with food service and technology, had to get teachers in to close up the classroom so that we can get those ready for summertime. We have a whole process in place for picking up student materials and letting them return materials to us. That's going to be a major undertaking. All those textbooks that went home have to come back and have to be inventoried and also have to be taken care of in terms of hygiene. So we have all those plans in the work, and that's required a lot of help from the operations side. Just keeping the district clean over this time period, because we've had people need to go into buildings and get materials, and behind that we have to clean and make sure it's safe for the future. So that's been a big part of what we're doing. Construction projects, there's of course the big bond projects like Westerville South, and it's already underway. Our process for Amherst and new buildings and renovations, our partnership with the architects and construction firms and bid processes and OFCC, all that's gone on behind the scenes and remains on schedule and on target. So we're pleased that we have not suffered delays or had to put projects to the side. If anything, for summer capital improvement projects, because of the closure through the end of June, we're able to move some of those up. I know Mr. Dorn was able to open the door to some of our buildings that have summer capital improvement projects as early as May 4th, this coming week. So we're pleased with that. And then in human resources, we still need to staff for next year. All the retirements and new positions that are in place for next year, we need to continue that. And so building out a human resource system that involves remote interviews through Teams has been part of that, and continuing to process applications and evaluate potential employees and all kinds of positions for next year is still going on. So all those operations are still in hand. And if anything, the time it takes to get what we used to get done has been expanded because of the need to do that remotely and getting the right players involved and using technology and reinventing how we do some of these processes. So really, I cannot say enough about how people have risen to the occasion and rethought how we do business and reinvented in ways that have been very helpful to us. Next slide. So, of course, what everybody's talking about now is what do we look like in the fall? And so I've titled this A Cloudy Crystal Ball. There's a lot of predictions and discussions about what it might look like. Really hard to say at this time whether or not we'll open in the fall looking the same. What we do know is this, that the order to keep buildings closed till the end of June has immediate impact on summer programs that we run, summer school, for example, and we are in the process of redeveloping what summer school would look like, including a K-8 component. We have a 9-12 component already in place. We're building out a K-8 component based on the school closure order. Of course, then you have the athletic and extracurricular programs. You're used to having athletic practices in the summertime, band camps, all those parts that are part of it, and then outside agencies that have used our facilities in the past. So we are re-examining those under these new orders and what can we do with those agencies to help as much as possible. If camps aren't run in the summer and childcare doesn't happen in the summer, that impedes people's ability to go back to work. If people can't go back to work, it's harder for us to open up the economy. So we understand that part and our role in it, and want to work with policymakers and decision makers on how we can partner with that and do it in a safe way for people. So, we know a little bit more about what it means between now and the end of June. After that, it starts to get murkier and murkier. So We are planning along the spectrum of everything from it will look exactly like we're used to it'll look exactly what it looks like now, and everything in between as our planning moves forward. I can assure you that we're not alone in that discussion. There are partnerships through all kinds of organizations, Central Ohio Superintendents Association, Buckeye Association of School Administrators. I know Ms. Marshall has groups she's working with. We're all talking with each other and talking with policymakers to see what it might look like in the future, and getting creative about what that might mean. And there's also, of course, the concern with what didn't happen this spring in terms of learning and student skills and preparedness for the future that we may need to backfill when we do come back. I think that's a big concern we have, is what gaps in learning our students can have and experiences students can have that we're going to need to address. So there's a quick overview of some of the work that's going on. Certainly in 2 more weeks, when we do this again, I may have more information that'll clarify some more about the summer and next fall. We'll, of course, had certain events happen, we can see how they went, but that's where we're at. If there's specific questions to what I've presented, I'm happy to take them, or we can transition to Ms. Marshall and then save questions from the board afterwards. I'll leave it to you, President Velardo, however you want to proceed. I think I covered all mine.
No, thank you. Very thorough. I appreciate that. I'll just tell you one thing that just comes to my mind is every once in a while, somebody will say, so your schools are closed, right? And what you just went through, just the tremendous amount of work that's going on behind the scenes. And it's just, wow, we just continue to be very blessed with the people that are continuing. The students and teachers are not in the classroom, but the education and the work is still being done in a bunch of different ways. Board, do you have anything you want to share, question, any thoughts at this point before we transition to Ms. Marshall? Anyone have anything they'd like to share?
I just, a quick, Dr. Kellogg, could you just talk a little bit about summer school? Because I've had some folks who've said now there's still summer school. People are wondering about, remedial courses kids might need. If you could just say a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, so what I can speak to that I know for certain is that the 9-12 credit program is set to run. That will be completely online using digital curriculum that we've used in the past. So that one is up and running, and I think the registration process is opened, I think. Check the website to be sure, but I'm pretty sure of that. K-8, we're still in some discussion. The order to stay closed to June 30th impacts when we can start and how much time we have. I think the proposal that's on my remote desktop that I haven't completely vetted yet involves a distance learning component with some digital curriculum that we want to move to, that we could open up sooner than June 30th. And then maybe a hybrid model as we're able to open up our classrooms in the future. I haven't been able to get to the details of that yet. My hope is to finalize that plan this week, approve it, and then get communication out to families next week. Part of what we're looking at is what we know about performance of students at this time period. So we may have some students who were struggling before this, whose struggles continued or were even more difficult during this time period. And then we may have some students who are doing fine, struggle during this time period, and their needs are a little bit different than that other set of students. Do they need a full summer school, or do they need support when we go back? So we're kind of scaffolding those needs based on what we're seeing in our data on student performance as we're getting in close to report cards. So we have some of that from interim data. So they're looking at that data for a means of communicating to people. Your child may want to consider this through summer school, or your child may want to consider another option we're going to have during the school year. So we're scaffolding those supports from summer school to next year. And I hope to have communication about the K-8 summer school program going out as early as next week. Does that help?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
I just want to echo what Rick was saying. I too have heard people say, well, so schools are closed, so the teachers are furloughed and nothing's going on at all. And anything we can do to get out this pretty remarkable information to the public would be important to do. Everything from making sure that this presentation is on the website to doing a series of releases around what is going on. John, you were absolutely right when you were talking about the incredible hard work that's going on. Every educator I know in our district and other districts has said to me that they are working harder and with more unknowns than they ever anticipated doing in their career. And the wonderful thing about that is how successful so many of these educators are being. Kudos to our staff, classified staff and licensed staff, for the way they have stepped up to creatively manage the, well, the word is always used, but the unprecedented situation that we're all in. The amount of connection with students and the amount of work that's actually going on around the district itself. It's more than I think most people would have anticipated. And I am very, very thankful for the people who work for Westerville City Schools.
Yeah, I could tell you, I was in a conversation with some teachers today, and two of them were some of our instructional technology coaches, Lane Holloman and Rachel Lacey. So we have 3 of those positions for all the teachers in the district, and their job, of course, is to show teachers how to use instructional technology in the classroom. They told me 6-fold. Their workload is 6-fold right now, where what was a nicety in the past is a necessity now. And as Mr. Haldeman said, things I've been telling people for 5 years, all of a sudden they want to know about. So there's a lot of work going on to make this happen. And there's some imperfections, but we're getting better at it. Thank you for those. And happy to answer any other questions or clarify anything else in the presentation with any other board member.
Thank you, Dr. Kellogg. Anybody else, any thought at this point? All right, let's shift over to Treasurer CFO. Ms. Marshall, would you give us some update, please?
Yes, thank you, President Velardo, members of the board. So I want to go over just kind of talk about refunds and then just the financial impact of what we're looking at as we know it now, as we're preparing to update the 5-year forecast. That will be on the May 18th board agenda. So I thought it would be good to get some information out as part of this presentation. We'll continue to update it as we learn new information as we go along. So as you know, it's ever changing every day. We find out something new. So Jill, if you want to go to the first slide. So this is a list of the refunds that we've issued as of April the 30th. So you can see we've issued a little over 2,300 checks for a little over $200,000. The biggest refund that we've done is the tuition and the pay to participate for spring sports, spring activities. So the tuition, we've gotten a lot of questions about that. That was part of the resolution that the board approved at the April 6th board agenda to waive those based on a daily rate. So we've calculated it based on a daily rate from the March 17th date through the end of the school year, May 21st. So there's a lot of odd numbers. I think someone got a refund for $138.40 or something like that. So it looks a little odd, but that's how we calculated that. And if anyone has any questions about that, I would encourage them to reach out to my office. We are checking our voicemails and emails regularly, and we are in the office on some days when we have to be. So that's what we have so far. We do anticipate that we'll have several more. So in addition to the board approved fees, all of our schools have various fees that they charge for trips and clubs that run through the district and different things like that. So as we go along, we'll likely see more of those through the end of the school year. And the AP and IB fees, we're waiting on AP and IB to see what they determine with those refunds, and any refunds we get for those programs will pass along to the parents as we get them. So I anticipate that will probably be early June, early to mid-June that we'll have that information back and be able to issue those refunds. So that's where we're at with refunds. Next slide, please. So I want to emphasize that this is a potential impact. So there's been a lot of conversation around state funding and what that looks like. I think everyone heard the governor's comments about ordering a 20% budget cut. I've worked a lot with Aaron Roush, the director of state funding at ODE, and he's communicated with me and other treasurers in Franklin County and around the state that the 20% that Dwayne was speaking to was for the remainder of the current budget year. So the state's fiscal year runs through June 30th, just like the school districts. So it really equals out to about a 4.5% decrease in the current year. Now there's a lot of conversation about whether we'll even see a cut in the current state funding. There's a lot of conversation about, would you rather us cut a little bit now and then more in 21, or not touch 20 and then cut even deeper in 21? So there's nothing been decided about that. We are waiting for OD to put out some guidance about that. I do expect that they will put out a simulation spreadsheet at some point that will allow us to calculate what our funding might look like for next year. The other thing that we looked at is the property tax collection rate. So looking at during the recession timeframe from 2008 to 2011, our collection rate for property taxes dropped by about 5%. So that that's about $6.2 million for us. So collections for fiscal year 20 are already done. So it would, this would first impact us with the second half payment in calendar 20, which would be the first payment in fiscal year 21. So that August payment, well, it's supposed to be a June payment, but the county auditor for both Franklin and Delaware County have both requested to delay that to August 20th, I think, or August 22nd. And so that would be a delay of that payment. We're not sure what that's going to look like. I do anticipate that we will see a drop in the collection rate as unemployment continues to climb during this closure. So conservatively, I think we can look at where the recession had us at the time. You know, we haven't experienced this before, so trying to estimate what that might look like, we really won't know until we start collecting those taxes in the fall. The Bureau of Workers' Compensation refunded our 2018 premium as part of a way to help businesses and local governments through this time. So that was equal to about $450,000. And then we are refunding all of the fees, and we had some rental fees that we had to refund as well through this. Interest revenue, I know I'm jumping all over the place, I apologize for that. But interest revenue, as our investments mature and we're reinvesting those funds, they're at much lower rates right now as the interest rates have decreased. So I anticipate that we'll see at least a drop of about $1 million next year in our interest revenue. We collect about $2.5 million annually in the general fund for interest. So the CARES Act provides should provide about $2 million for us. I think we got those numbers today. It's right around $2 million in additional funding that is coming from the federal government, and that will help offset the state revenue loss that we have. So ODE, if you're familiar with how the state budget normally works, when the last time when we went through the recession, there were some stabilization funds that were given by the federal government to local districts. And so the state decreased by at least that much because they knew we were getting the money from the federal government to help offset that. So I think we'll likely see that with this. So it's additional funding, but I anticipate it will just be to help offset whatever decreases we see from the state of Ohio. So that 20% in fiscal year 21, that's a big number. I don't know that we'll see that. I am hoping that we'll have some clarity before the 5-year forecast is updated at the next board meeting. I do anticipate that OD will put something out within the next week. But right now we're thinking 10 to 20% for fiscal year 21 for that drop. So that would be about $9.4 million in 21. All right, can we go to the next slide? So in looking at expenditures, we have some savings that I just realized, I'm sorry, I have the expenditures for the salaries and benefits in the wrong year. That should be fiscal year 2020, not 21. We will see a savings during this closure period for salaries and benefits due to a decrease in substitutes and overtime and extra time. So it's a little over $1 million. Utilities with the city of Westerville's utility holiday, we saved about $98,000 from them waiving April's utility payment. Transportation costs, as we're not driving our buses around as much, buses are still delivering meals and things like that, but the daily routes that we normally have, which are about 7,000 daily, 7,000 miles daily that they run, we're anticipating about $80,000 in savings for fuel for that. Chromebooks, I want to talk a little bit about that. So we had some Chromebooks that were scheduled to be refreshed next year out of next year's budget. We are moving that up due to the Chromebook distribution program that we have. So that way we'll have enough Chromebooks to start the next school year. So we're taking that money out of fiscal year 21 and we're allocating it into the current fiscal year 20. So that's why you see that move. And then there's an additional $30,000 in there for the rebate exchange program from the Chromebook distributions. And we'll go to the next slide. So overall, the net impact, and again, that fiscal year 21, $1 million of that, I apologize, the expenditure savings should be over in the other fiscal year 20 column. So overall, the impact could be significant. Again, we anticipate that the CARES Act should provide for about $2 million in funding to help offset some of that. I will continue working with ODE to try to gauge what that impact will look like. I hope that we have some clarity at some point within the next week or two so that we'll have something solid to go on for the updated forecast. But right now, the governor's comments is the best we have. Can we go to the next slide? So there are several variables and there's a lot that we don't know at this time. I think we get new information about every day, every other day at least. So we're still trying to figure that out. Healthcare costs, we may see an increase. We are self-insured as a district, so we may see an increase due to COVID-19 claims. We are required to cover testing for the virus at 100%. And then in the antibody testing, if it's an FDA approved test, that's also would be paid for at 100% with the healthcare plan. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act added additional benefits for employees, additional leave time if their kid's school is closed due to the virus, which in Ohio, all schools are closed due to the virus. So that pretty much puts everyone in that being eligible for that. And it's an extension of the Family Medical Leave Act that they have. And then there's also an additional 2 weeks of emergency paid leave for folks if they have been exposed to or think they may have or are vulnerable to the virus. So we don't know what those costs will look like. It will just depend on the usage we get from that. Private companies do have the ability to get a tax credit from those costs in their next year's taxes, but we're a public entity. We don't pay taxes to the IRS, so that's not something that's available to us as a governmental unit. The recession's used as a benchmark for the estimates that we have. It's the best thing we have to use right now, but like I said, this could not be the same as a recession. It could look completely different from the recession. That's just what we have to use right now. So property tax loss is likely temporary. That's because the way the law works, those would just be delayed payments that we would receive at some point in the future. State revenue loss, my concern with that is that when the state trims funding for schools, they set that as a new baseline going forward for the next biennium budget. So that's one of the biggest concerns that we have right now as we're looking at what the current biennium ends the second year is fiscal year 21. So we don't know what fiscal year 22 and 23 will look like when we're having those conversations about that next biennium budget. So that's all I have. Does the board have any questions that I can answer?
I have one question, thought, kind of wondering. It's a legislative question. Based on previous recession, 7, 8, 9, et cetera, using as a benchmark for estimates, a lot of estimating going on in here, and we know that.
Mm-hmm.
The Federal CARES Act, likely a couple of million. The loss in state funding, and I know we're talking about 1 year,
Mm-hmm.
likely a couple million. Is that I don't know how to, I'm not even sure how to ask the question. Is that a legislative, I don't know how to say it. Is that a legislative process that the state and the federal go through with each other? Are they dancing? That one is saying, well, we're going to reduce. You follow what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think I follow what you're asking. So President Velardo, I think the state looks to see what the federal government is willing to provide, as they're aware of. They know that Westerville is going to get $2 million from the CARES Act, right? So as they're thinking about where could they reduce funding for Westerville, they'll start with that, because we wouldn't really see a loss because we're receiving that money from the federal government. So that's what happened during the recession when we had the fiscal stabilization funds that were provided. Similar to when the lottery money came into play with the state funding formula, that was just to offset other money that went away and never really added anything to school funding to get us to where we needed to be funded. So I don't necessarily think that they're working together and planning that, just because that's a lot to do for the federal government and all the states to try to coordinate that. But I think our state most definitely takes a look at what's available to us from the federal government and taking that into account when they're deciding what to cut for the next year, potentially this year. I don't know that we'll see anything this year. There was a lot of conversation around I would rather see a bigger cut next year than have a sudden cut this year. So it's anybody's guess, really. But I will say Aaron Roush at ODE is the director of school funding. He's been very helpful. He's joined all of the meetings that we've had with the Franklin County treasurers get together bi-weekly now. And we're trying to hammer all this out and see what everybody's thinking for the future. And he's been very good about joining us and helping us kind of work through that and giving us the information he has available as he has it. So they've been really great to work with.
Good. And when I kind of say that dance piece, I don't mean that in a like a negative way, but it does sound like you're saying that the state really is looking at the likely revenue from CARES federal to Westerville and saying, okay, we will reduce by about that same amount so you are not negatively impacted.
Yeah.
We won't take more. The reason I kind of wondered about that is because your last slide indicated that you have a pretty good concern that some of the state reduction could become permanent.
Yeah. So
The CARES Act is not permanent.
right.
The state reduction could be permanent. And listen, all 5 of us on the board are trying to educate ourselves legislatively. I mean, I get that. I should just speak for myself. I'm still learning all of that. Ms. Altman and I are legislative liaison, but I guarantee you all 5 of us are really trying to figure that out. And I don't say that with any edge at all. It's just my trying to figure out the process so that when it comes time to advocate this year or next year or the next year, we can think through logically and sequentially. Well, in this year was done this, so in this year might need to do this. Does that make any sense of what I'm trying to figure out there?
Yeah, I think it does. I think, the state, as they're looking at this, and they're waiting on April's numbers to come back for the revenue loss that they're seeing from this, as the unemployment rate rises, their income tax, sales tax, everything is declining rapidly. And so what I've heard so far is what they're projecting right now is twice what's available in the rainy day fund. So there has to be something has to give somewhere.
Okay.
Programs. And so I think schools will just be on the list as we're getting some funding from the federal government. I do think that they anticipate that schools will see some savings through this process because we're not in the school buildings as we normally would be. Like I showed, it's not really, the savings that we're seeing isn't really impactful if we're talking about a 20% potential cut in our state revenue. So.
Well, I'm really grateful for how you've tried to dig into this, and that's the only place I had. Anybody else have a kind of thought or wondering, a question response for Ms. Marshall?
Yeah, I'm thinking, given your last comment, Nicole, when you were talking about they think that schools are saving money, might be a good idea just to proactively put together a letter with the information that you've shared tonight on what it really looks like for schools right now, so they can see that the savings that they may optimistically think are going to be there really are not.
Right.
It'd be helpful to get that out to our legislators and maybe to get our school districts that we work with to also send that sort of information to the greater legislative body. And also, Rick, to your point about the legislative process, one of the things I want us to keep in mind and not be caught flat-footed about it is a significant way to make up for the loss that schools are facing would be to remove the voucher component that takes dollars from us. So as we look at where we want to go and the information that we want out there on our behalf, we need to be telling the legislative body what's going on with us, what the money looks like, and our other districts as well. And we also need to be preparing to take on the voucher question as it comes up, because if you look at our losses and you look at what goes out the door to vouchers overall from the district, we are getting hammered in a way that shouldn't be happening. And we put a big fight up for one component of the voucher program. And I would like to see us be ready to take up that fight again.
Nancy, you make a good point. That was a conversation that we had with Aaron during that meeting, was that if the state's really looking at significant cuts like that for school districts, we'd like to see the charter schools, the private schools, everyone take the same sort of reduction, and that we don't put it all on the public schools to see those reductions. If they're going to make reductions, it should be made across the board and not just on the backs of the public schools.
Good thoughts, Nancy. Thank you. Anyone else have a question, comment?
Yes. Nicole, could you touch on once again, I've heard from some who are asking the question about getting a rebate since we're doing refunds, if they could get a rebate on their on their real estate taxes to compensate. Could you speak to that once again, just to clarify for everybody?
Yeah, so property taxes are set in law, so it's based on ballot initiatives that were approved by the voters. So the school district doesn't have the ability to move the due date of property taxes or anything like that. As we look at the reduction that we're anticipating in state revenue, and we also expect that we will have a reduction in our collections from property taxes just due to people not being able to make some of their payments on property taxes as the unemployment increases. We do anticipate that a sharp decline in our revenues that more than outweighs any reductions or savings that we would see from not being in schools during this 2.5 month period. So that's where we're at right now.
Thank you.
And I do apologize that presentation is not correct with the fiscal year 20 and 21 numbers. I'll update that for us to repost it to the board docs so that it's correct with those numbers for the substitute costs and the overtime costs. That savings should be shown in 20, not 21. I apologize for that error.
Ms. Marshall, just one quick question. I know we'll be going over the 5-year forecast here soon, and you're hoping to have more information before you put that final version, the May version, together.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just wanting to make sure, and I'm sure they are, but can you just talk a little bit about how treasurers are communicating? I'm sure the governor is aware of that timing, that school districts are preparing 5-year forecasts. And what kinds of information you're hoping for that might be helpful in the next couple of weeks. I assume that's about how much the cuts will be next year, but anything else you're looking for that we can help ask for?
Yeah, so I mean, yes, so the treasurers are all talking and working together and trying to estimate as best we can consistently across the districts, especially I know in Franklin and Delaware counties, as we're meeting on a regular basis and talking about what that looks like. I think what would be most helpful is if we could get an idea of, one, if we're going to see immediate cuts in the current fiscal year, or if that is something that's going to be pushed out to the next fiscal year. You know, the conversation around, well, the 20% cut was just based on what was left in the current year budget, not for the whole year. But then the conversation about, well, we need twice the amount of what's in the rainy day fund in order just to continue operating. I just think we need better clarity around what the state is thinking going forward. And I do think that we will get that. They anticipate to have updated April numbers on May the 10th. So I do think that will be the time that we get that clarity. Once they see what April has done, I think they'll be able to offer some more information about what going forward might look like.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thought or a question for Ms. Marshall or Dr. Kellogg?
Could I just something I heard Nicole say that I think I heard it the right way. I want to reemphasize. So regardless of what happens for FY20 with the state cut or no cut, we're projecting up to what looks like a 20% cut for FY21, which is about, I'm going to round it off, say $9.5 million, which means our allocation in FY21 from the state would fall to like 35 million. FY22 becomes the important number as what's the reset? Because if they do what they've typically done is the set point is, what did you get last year? Then we're going all the way backwards to 35 million from close to 45 million. And so you're really not losing 9 million in 1 year. You're losing the 9 million plus what you lose the next year because you've gone backwards in terms of state allocation. So to Dr. Nestor Baker's point about what are we going to advocate for, there's the voucher piece, charter school piece, and how that's funded. And then if we do take a cut next year, where's the reset point when the economy's back again? Do we go back up to where we were and project forward or not? And in the absence of a funding formula, it's a guessing game because it just becomes an arbitrary number again rather than a formula again. So I think those are some things to keep an eye on. And I know Ms. Marshall's keeping an eye on those things. It's just in my head that's really detrimental to us.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand too with the legislative process. So that our funding formula is set in law. So, you know, the House and the Senate and the governor. It's a whole process to get that into place every 2 years as part of the biennium budget. These cuts that we're talking about now would just be based on an executive order with the budget. So him cutting the appropriations, it wouldn't change the formula. And what I've heard from ODE is that the governor is able to make those decisions through the budget by cutting the appropriations, and he doesn't need legislative approval to do that. So, I mean, my hope would be that we would advocate going forward. I think, you know, schools have been leaned on really hard through this whole process. And like John said earlier, I think there's a lot of people working very, very hard right now to make sure that the kids have what they need while they're home. The governor's been very clear that learning will continue and that school is closed to students and not staff. And that the expectation is that we maintain business as usual as much as possible without being in school. So that means that we have the same operating costs through that whole time, with the exception of a very small savings that we'll see from not physically being in our buildings. So I think that those are the conversations that we'll have with our legislators going forward as we're talking about this. Now we're just waiting and seeing.
Thank you. And thank you for comments, board. I just wanted to dive into that a little bit. And we know, we know there is a lot of financial pain out there right now. Individuals, organizations, we know that. And we know what's going to be happening to tax collections and so on. And I don't want us to think we're better than anybody else. There is joint sharing of struggle. That's a community. That's what we do. That being said, before all of this, we were concerned of the direction of funding, from vouchers to other entities. And I think, Dr. Kellogg, you're exactly right that we have to keep our eyes on the ball. And the whole reset point is a concern to me. And I think that's what I was kind of thinking in, Ms. Marshall, your last slide of, well, okay, that becomes permanent. That becomes permanent. You're starting the whole game 3 or 4 spaces back. And so I won't beat that any further. I want to say to whoever is listening, this board is really determined to figure out this whole financial legislative piece. And I know, Ms. Marshall, you and Dr. Kellogg are as well. And in the end, we're advocating for the good of students and faculty and community. So that's I will leave it there unless there's another comment from another board member or such.
I do just want to mention, just remind the board that it's all very up in the air at this point. I mean, there's just so much that we don't know. Yep. And trying to predict what this will look like next fall even is really difficult to do. So we'll keep our eye on the ball and keep watching.
I know you all will.
Communicating and.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Kellogg. Very thorough, both of you. Really appreciate that a lot. Moving on, agenda item 8.01, public comments pertaining to action items. Remind those who are listening, there's a link where you are watching to submit those comments. They will be routed to the direct person. You'll get a response. And that is our pledge to you. Moving on to agenda item 9.01, amended fiscal year 2020 annual appropriations. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you much, Ms. Marshall. I believe you are sharing again with us.
Yes. President Velardo, members of the board, thank you. So what we have is amending the current fiscal year appropriations. So like we talked about in the presentation, because of the Chromebook distribution, we're moving the refresh for next year's Chromebooks up a year. And so we'd like to go ahead and get those purchased before the fiscal year ends so that we have them in place for fall. So this is just moving that budget out of fiscal year 21 into fiscal year 20. So we will reduce fiscal year 21's budget by the same amount for those Chromebooks.
Thank you. Are there any questions, comments, concerns about that? Hearing none, Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Dr. Nesta Baker,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 10, 10.01 through 10.08 is our consent agenda. May I have a motion and a second for the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Sorry.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone to present on this, Dr. Kellogg?
Dr. Hopkins is on the line. I saw him, so I know he's there.
I thought he was too. I didn't see it.
Good evening, President Velardo, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg. I'd like to
There
present
you
for your
are.
consideration some of tonight's highlights from the personnel consent agenda. We have 3 retirements. Kathy Messer is retiring from her transportation position with the district. She's been with Westerville for 28 years of service. Patty Revoir is retiring from her custodial position with the district. She's most recently worked as the assistant head custodian at South High School. She's provided Westerville City Schools with 27 years of service. And finally, Michael Tackett is retiring from his custodial position with the district. Most recently, he's worked at Heritage Middle School, and he has provided the district with over 30 years of experience. So that's 85 years of service that we're losing from these 3 retirees. We also have on tonight's agenda 5 resignations from other various classified positions. There's also a recommendation to the board for the reemployment of a number of licensed and classified administrative contracts. And we're also recommending for the employment of 6 new educators and licensed staff. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Any questions or comments about this?
Just thank you to our 3 retirees. It's an amazing record of service to the district and this community, and we appreciate you very, very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nestor Baker. We go through this consent agenda rather quickly. This represents a whole lot of really good people doing a whole lot of really good work through, I'll keep the theme, a whole lot of years. So we're just very appreciative. So thank you for recognizing that. Any other questions, comments? Hearing none. Thank you, Dr. Hopkins. Ms. Marshall, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Dr. Nesta Baker,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, thank you very much. Moving on, agenda item 11.01, final reading policy 5460, graduation requirements. When we were looking at this earlier, there is a typo, so I need a motion and a second to amend what has been submitted.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you're going to describe the amendment, I didn't know who amended it.
Jen, do you want to say what you were amending?
Oh, yeah. So I'll pull it up here. There's a typo on the second page under social studies where it says 2 instead of 3. So the text says 2, and then this is the number of credits, and then there's a 3 in parentheses. So we just need to match those up so they both say 3.
Is the amendment? Are there any questions or discussions? Thank you very much. Then we are voting on, as amended, 5460 graduation requirements. Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes. Miss Marshall, did I do that right? You looked at me like I made a misstep there.
So you voted on amending the policy. Now you'll want to vote on approving the final policy.
That's why you're here, Miss Marshall, to keep me honest. Now we have amended it. I'd like to vote on the policy, a motion and a second to vote on the policy as amended.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Any reason to embarrass me anymore? Thank you very much. Miss Marshall, please call the roll.
Dr. Nestor Baker,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, thank you very much. Agenda item 11.02, final reading, policy 5460.02, students at risk of not qualifying for a high school diploma. Again, this is old business. We have gone through this. Are there any questions that you'd like to bring up at this point? Did I ask for a motion in a second yet? See, I made one mistake and now it's gonna domino through the rest of this meeting. May I have a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Now, any questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, thank you very much. Agenda item 11.03, final reading, revised courses of study journalism 1, 2, and 3. May I have a motion and a second?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Any
Second.
que- Thank you, Mr. Bell. Any questions, concerns at this point? Hearing none, Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, thank you very much. Agenda item 11.04, final reading, new course of study, mathematical modeling and reasoning, and advanced quantitative reasoning course. May I have a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any questions, comments? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Dr. Nestor Baker,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, thank you very much. Agenda item 11.05, final reading, new resources for advanced placement courses, AP World History and AP Calculus. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any discussion, comment? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, thank you very much. Agenda item 12.01, new business, we have none. Agenda item 13.01, I'd like to have a motion and a second to approve a resolution regarding 2019 through 20 administrator evaluations. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. Dr. Hopkins, are you still there to describe this a little bit for folks?
Yes, I am. President Velardo.
Thank you, sir.
members of the board, Dr. Kellogg. This resolution is very similar, in fact, is almost identical to the one we approved last board meeting for teachers. Due to the fact that the school buildings are closed, as we said, schools are not closed, but the school buildings are closed, it is either impossible or impractical for our principals and other administrators to participate through the OPES process. So this resolution will allow us to exempt administrators from the state OPES process this school year.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hopkins. Questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none. Ms. Marshall, please call the roll.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Dr. Nussbaker,
Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes, thank you very much. Agenda item 14.01, public comments. Again, there is a link on where you are watching for you to submit public comments, and we are appreciative of people submitting some comments, concerns, and questions. Moving on to agenda item 15.01, board comments. Normally, I go in alphabetical order and put Ms. Altman on the spot, but I may reverse it this time and put Dr. Nestor Baker, who would go first, right? If I did reverse?
Yes. Well, actually, you would go first,
Well,
but I'll go first.
you are correct.
To what I wanted to say earlier, the main thing that I really wanted to get across was how diligently our people are working, and how, even though our community can't see it the way they often do, you're still getting a huge bang for the buck here in Westerville. Also, I want to commend those of you who are working on the graduation plan. I am actually excited about seeing how this plays out. I know how hard it is for families to give up that long-held dream of the big graduation and all the people and everything. But what we are trying to do is to provide that same sense of connection and excitement in a different form. So I want to thank everybody that's working on it. And I know a huge amount of work is going into making it happen, but it's going to be good, and it's going to be happy. And thank you very much for that work.
Thank you, Nancy. Ms. Davidson, any questions, comments to share?
Yeah, real quick, Dr. Kellogg, do we still have the alternate date for graduation on the 27th?
We
Just in
still
case.
have, yeah, we still holding that date with the vendor. So the Celeste Center. So if things open up differently, we can look at that date and look at that facility and decide what we want to do.
Okay. I'm just so very grateful to our teachers and our staff. Thank you so much for all that you're doing. So.
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. Mr. Bell.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is Teacher Appreciation Week, so I certainly want to extend my true appreciation to all of our teachers, all of our staff. Thank you for all that you do. You are precious to us, and you are very much essential in all of our lives. If there was ever a doubt in people's minds just how important our educators are, the events of the last 60 days have underscored just how valuable you truly are. And so I just want you to know how much I and the rest of the board, I'm sure, we just want you to know how much we truly appreciate you for all that you do. Also want to thank Dr. Kellogg and Ms. Marshall. Want to thank you for your updates this evening during these, here's the word again, unprecedented times that we are living through. Communication is something that's very important. And so thank you so much for sharing all that is going on to let people know that we are The team is hard at work. We are thinking and planning about what the future of the district will look like. So, so thank you all.
Thank you, Vice President Bell. Ms. Altman.
Yeah, thank you, President Velardo. Just getting to go last, I just get to echo everyone else, which is nice. I do want to say Teacher Appreciation Week, between my 3 kids, I think we have, I counted it up, probably 13 teachers that my family is interacting with regularly. So I so appreciate the work they're doing, because my kids are still working hard. In fact, my junior's complaining that she's working too hard. So, so thank you. That's a good thing in my book. So thank you to all the teachers and to all who are working on graduation. I also want to say thanks for the attention to the 5th and 8th graders and their transition too. I really appreciate that. I know that it's not a huge step like graduation, but for those kids, they'll never go back to those buildings and see the same adult faces in the same way. So to at least acknowledge that for them, I know, because I know some of them, that's going to be meaningful. So thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Altman. I appreciate that. And I had forgotten until I was reminded not too long ago that a 5th grade clap out is a big deal to 5th graders, and 8th grade into high school, you know, the scary world of high school for our middle schoolers. That is a big transition. So I'm just grateful for the leadership across the district saying, you know, we need to do something for them too. I'm extremely disappointed in Dr. Nestor Baker almost making me cry talking about graduation. I am none too happy about that right now. It is increasingly difficult for me and many parents, but I am very grateful for the district leadership saying, let's do something, let's do some things, let's celebrate them in the best way we can. It's not going to be what it was, but it's going to be unique. And I'm very grateful for everybody behind the scenes doing that, truly. A big shout out, you know, Teacher Appreciation Week. There's an article, I believe it's USA Today, and the headline is something like, teachers are finally appreciated, comma, it only took a pandemic. And so there is just something to that. And if any teachers are watching this, I guarantee you have 5 board members and 2 leadership team on this visible right here, who are very proud of what you're doing and grateful for what you're doing. And we are noticing what you're doing. So thank you. And I know we sent out a leadership exchange, a thought exchange, sorry, and seeking advice, consent, thoughts from the community, and nearly a couple thousand comments. So thank you, community, for saying that and saying, yes, can we align our communication process better? That's good. We need to know. That's awesome. So thank you, teachers. I wish I had a big kind of firework display back here going on, but it's only Reverend Bell who can create those kind of graphics. And I'll stop talking finally just to say, I think it's also a bus driver, is it not? Bus driver celebration day today. So when we leave here, let's go outside and just honk our horns or something and celebrate them. Okay. No, that's all too much, but I cannot tell you how grateful we are for this district and for allowing us to be a part of it. It is beyond an honor to be on this board and to be a part of it. So thank you.
President Velardo?
Yes, sir.
Could I acknowledge one new employee group that we haven't acknowledged that maybe we want to?
Absolutely.
Parents are now frontline educators So in honor of Teacher Appreciation Week, we appreciate the partnership we have with our parent educators. We can send them all their teaching certificates at the end of this year, so they're eligible to be employed as full-time teachers. I think they've had their student teaching experience. They have been, and 3 of you are dealing with that, and our treasurer is dealing with that. All of you, in fact, in some degree or form or another, are playing that parent educator role. So I know you're learning about it too. So I know our teachers would like to say thank you to our parents who are helping on the other side of this digital divide to make sure that what we're putting out there is being meaningful to kids and giving us information. So we honestly do appreciate their role now as part of it. They've always been a part of our educational community, but I think we've never felt more joined at the hip than ever before. So thank you to them as well.
Great point. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? All right, moving on. Agenda item 16.01. The board will meet in virtual regular session on Monday, May 18, 2020 at 6 p.m. And moving on, agenda item 17.01. May I have a motion and a second to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you so much, Ms. Marshall. Would you please call the roll?
Dr. Baker,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson, Mrs. Davidson,
Muted, Ms. Davidson.
just shake your head.
Technical difficulty. Sorry, I've got 2 computers going and I'm hitting wrong things. Yes.
Mr. Velardo.
Yes. Thank you much. We are adjourned.
Board members, thank you. Please hold while we stop the YouTube